Hi, beautiful souls. This is Sadhana. Welcome to my channel and welcome back to my series about my deck collection. I wanted to make this series a little more informative than just showing you everything that I have, because that's not why I have tarot cards. I don't have them to collect them as so much as to use them to teach and to share with students and clients. And today I'm going to talk about decks that I think work really well with kids and kids of different ages, and I'll tell you why I think they work well with a certain age of child. Let's just dive right in. So I have the Spirit Song Tarot by Paulina Cassidy here. One of the nice features about this deck is that there's 78 different animals on the deck, so there's no repetition, and you could also use this deck very much to work with the energy of the animals and working with the cards one at a time. I think that kids really connect well with animals, and there's a lot of medicine in these cards. Saying that, however, down here on the bottom, we have keywords. We also have the elemental symbols, which is really nice. These are in a font that would be kind of challenging for a younger child to read. So you would definitely either have to read it for them, or it would have to be for a little bit older child. But I think in general, the artwork is really gentle. The colors are gentle. And you could, if you were a teacher doing this, you could definitely supplement Paulina's guidebook and to make a worksheet for each of the cards, because there is just so many layers and so many sweet elements to work with. And I don't think kids, always need to have a saccharine story. And as you know, in the tarot, many of these lessons are challenging, and we need to work through different things even when we are very, very young. So I don't think the tarot is something to steer away from in working with kids or giving reading to kids. But I think the potential of the tarot with children, especially young children, so I'm thinking anywhere like from 8 to 11 years old, is through the power of story. And I know I showed this deck in my last video, in the previous video. This is the Mystic Fairy Tarot, and I just wanted to go through this because I know I told you about it, but I didn't show you in detail. So in the minors in this deck, each of the suits, A's through 10, has a complete story. So in the extended guidebook, this does not come in the guidebook with just the cards. So you have to get the big guidebook by Barbara Moore. You get the full script for the whole story. And this is a really beautiful way to teach through tarot, because the kids are going to remember the story of the young fae who meets the water nymph. And of course, when we have different types of beings coming, in contact with each other and falling in love, there's going to be, teasing and issues with family and friends and all kinds of different things. And so this is a story about falling in love with a different kind of being from a different culture, and the heartache and the sadness, and what happens in the end is that I believe they do get together. Sorry, it's been a while since I read this story, but there they are at the end. And they also look a little bit more mature. So this story has evolved, I guess, over time. The other beauty of this deck, too, is that for the most part, all of the creatures and everyone looks very fairly gentle. So you can bring in, I just pulled this one out here. So here's the Star card. And if you are weaving stories with children, you could easily bring in, a lesson with the Star card, with this water story here. The other thought that occurred to me too is, because I really like to, teach with the tarot, and I've done lots of videos on the court cards and so forth. But I think this has a potential to work with kids as well too, right? Talking about different personalities and different energies of, dads or uncles or fathers or leaders or whatever. And I like the way that Linda Ravenscroft has illustrated this deck. I think she did a really good job in evoking the energy of each of these suits. And so, I think that could work really, really well with kids. This is The Way of the Panda Tarot by Kimberly Zan and illustrated by Celia LaBelle. I think Kim's deck has the potential to work with kids really well. There are a few symbols that kids are going to get right off the bat, and you would be able to definitely bring in, you know, the lollipop and the Ferris wheel and talk to the subtle layers of the messages. Even, you know, if kids have all had to experience one time or another letting go of emotions or letting go of feelings or moving on. And I think that this is definitely, you know, these are approachable images and they're definitely accessible for young children. This Six of Swords reminds me so much of Curious George. I don't know why, just that one Curious George book where they're making paper boats. But I think if you are needing a deck to help a child to open up and talk more, and they like these fat, roly-poly, cheerful panda bears, it might be just a beautiful way to enter into conversation, especially if you brought in, you know, a stuffed panda bear and had that with you on your table as well too. And this Five of Wands, you know, they're just, it doesn't feel so bad, right? Sure, they've had an argument. Sure, things have kind of gone upside down and they're a little difficult, but they're not hurt. They're all, you know, they're all just fine. And for that reason, I think, you know, this is totally, totally manageable. And many, many of her choices of illustration remind me of children's stories. Like I can see that Disney movie, you know, where they're sucking the spaghetti with the two dogs, that one here. And you may or may not want to bring in anything else that it reminds you of. And here's an example of a bear that is a little worn and weary and been through a lot and maybe even been through some bullying. And I definitely think that is a good segue into that kind of conversation. Tarot, I don't think just has to be for adults, and we have the potential to work with kids when a deck is, you know, accessible in that way. So I think this one definitely works. Sorry, one more card from this deck. I really wanted to share with you my thoughts on this card, which is so cleverly done. The devil, of course, here is mankind, who's created these traps. And even though the bear looks like the scary one here, it's really man who is the scary one. And I think kids are definitely going to get that right away. If you are looking for more of a straight up RWS clone type deck to work with kids, I think any of these three decks will do the trick. It just kind of depends on your audience. I think the oldest audience of these three decks is the one on the right. These two definitely feel younger to me, especially the Candy deck. So on the left is Lo Scarabaeo's Happy Tarot. In the center is Pamela Chan's Crystal Unicorn. This is a self-published deck. And on the right, also Lo Scarabaeo deck. This is Tarot of the Magical Forest. And so even though this one is full of sweetness and cute little creatures, it does, to me, have a little bit of shade and darker tone and a sense of humor. So that's the Chariot card. And like we were looking at another Five of Wands, I think in the Panda Tarot, this doesn't look unmanageable, right? It's definitely something that a child could cope with. But here's an example. So here's your Queen of Swords, which looks a little bit dark to me for a young child, but still not a scary image at all. And then the Unicorn deck is pretty much straight up RWS, except with a unicorn on every single card. And if you have any My Little Pony fans, this is definitely going to relate to that, especially because they're so used to seeing a cutie mark on the back, and you can talk about the magical crystals and things like that. So yes, that's a pretty sweet little deck. And then this is your Candyland deck. It's called Happy Tarot. I don't know why it's called Happy Tarot. It should have been called Candy Tarot. Pretty much every suit has some kind of sweetness in it. And even the challenging cards, though the colors are a little bit darker, you do still, they're not scary in any way. And you could definitely use this with kids. Another way to use the tarot with children is to choose decks that are based on familiar children's stories. So if your child were familiar with Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, either of these decks would make a perfect choice. If your child is familiar with Charlotte's Web or the Curious George stories, and there were tarot decks based on those stories, then I would choose that deck. Because what this allows you to do is to share stories and talk in the third person through the voice of the character without making it too personal for the child. It's like working with a puppet. Through the voice of a puppet, a child may be able to share something very personal. And similarly, through a familiar story on a tarot card, something that is very difficult to talk about may be a little more comfortable through an image on a familiar card. All right, so let me give you an example. So Dame Darcy's on the left and the Bubba Studios deck's on the right. This Nine of Swords with Alice in the Pool of Tears may evoke a memory or a dream or an experience of overwhelming emotions in a child, right? Because they're familiar with the story, they're able to talk about it from the perspective of Alice. Or here, when Alice is really, really small in relation to the dog, maybe there was an experience of bullying or being overpowered by an adult. And here we have faces in the flowers. So maybe this is a child that has an active imagination, or perhaps is clairvoyant, doesn't have an opportunity to talk about that. So seeing this card will evoke that kind of experience and memory and opportunity to release and let that go. Or perhaps there's some, grieving about a grandmother. I'm just saying that because we've got the sheep here knitting needles and Alice sitting here. It just feels very kind of emotional, even though this is the Two of Swords. So not necessarily using the deck as we would with a deck, but allowing the power of the story to come through and giving the child the gift of free expression through interpreting the story in whatever way, arises for them. I think it's a really powerful thing to do. And lastly, I just wanted to mention the Bix, which I did a full walkthrough of the other day. There's something about its simplicity that, and I haven't used this with any kids yet, I think might work really well, especially with older children. I'm kind of intrigued by this artwork. So please let me know if you work with children either as a teacher or a psychologist or as a parent, and if you've used tarot with them and how you use it and which decks you use. Thank you very much for being with me here today. And as always, I look forward to reading your comments and questions below. Stay well, my friends. Namaste.